Hello there. Thanks for coming back. My wife asked me to wear a visual aid today, so this is a shirt with a reaper on it and some dark birds. So there's my visual aid. I'd like to talk a little bit about the great city that's mentioned in Revelations. And we can look at chapter 18 in Revelations. John says, after I saw all these things in verse 1, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth were waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Read Revelation chapter 18. You don't have to be afraid to read it. We talked some in Matthew 21 when we were looking at the parable of the vineyard about how the servants that were sent there to check on the crops were killed, and then the son was sent and he was killed. And Jesus asked, what should happen to these men? And then we saw more servants that were sent for the wedding invitation. And the father was so wroth, the king was so wroth, that he sent his armies to destroy and burn the city of those people. So read Matthew 21. Hopefully you've already read that. In Matthew 13, there's a long list of parables about the end of the world. Anytime you read the end of the world, you can put the end of the age, because that's literally what that word means. And there's descriptions of reapers in there, and Jesus says the reapers are the angels. So in Revelations, we see a lot of angels. This is a great city. This is a main character in the book of Revelations. You see it throughout. We'll take a look at some other places where it's mentioned. But this is where every foul bird is gathered. Every dark bird has taken residence in this city of Babylon. And this is where the Lord's wrath is poured out on. So if we back up to Revelation chapter 14, in verse 8, it says, there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So again, it's the same message. It's scattered throughout the book of Revelation. It's the same city. It's the evil city, Babylon. So what is this city? When I was growing up, I was told that it could be Rome, the 7 hills of Rome, and that the harlot would be sitting upon the beast, and that's where the Pope is in Rome, and the Catholic Church base is there. So there's been a lot of Catholic and Baptist history where Catholics killed a lot of Baptists and Anabaptists and people that we draw a connection to. So it's pretty hard to see them as a true church. We see them as like a false church. That's how I was raised. They're not going to be the bride. The bride will be the true church that, they think we can track through the trail of blood, even if we can. That's kind of the teaching. So I don't think this great city, this Babylon, is Rome. And I don't think that the harlot is the Catholic Church. I was taught that growing up. I'd like you to look at the evidence here. Let's look at what the Bible says. I had a lot of teachers teach me that. That was their opinion. I've since then looked at the Bible, trying to figure out what this great city is. We talked about the harlot, and I think we can identify the harlot. But in Revelations 14, verse 14, a little later in the chapter here, it says, "And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon it one sat like unto the Son of Man." This is the Son of Man on a cloud, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, "Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." I would also encourage you, when we read the word earth, to know that we can interchange the word land. The harvest of the land is ripe. Thrust in thy sickle. That's what he's telling the Son of Man on a cloud. I think it's awesome. Let's pause here for a second so I don't get ahead of myself. I think it's awesome. This guy, this angel, he comes out of the temple. An angel runs out of the temple with a loud voice, says to him on the cloud, "Thrust in thy sickle and reap." And he that was on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped, or the land was reaped. Here's something else cool. "And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the land, of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe." This is the vineyard. Now, I told you when we were studying the parable of the vineyard, I think it's clearly speaking that Pharisees and the chief priests, they knew he was talking about them. He was talking about that generation, or that wicked people. He knew he was talking directly to them, but they knew that. So this angel that comes out of the altar says, "Thrust in thy sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe." And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth, or the land, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city. So it's the great city. This is the picture we're given from verse 8. The winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse's bridle. And it gives some description of a deep river of blood. So this is the angels in Matthew 13 when Jesus is teaching parables. He lets us know that the reapers are the angels. We've got an angel coming out of the altar. We've got an angel coming out of the temple. We've got an angel coming out of the temple in heaven. We know that the temple on earth was fashioned after what was in heaven. We've got a new Jerusalem that's coming. It's not here yet. They're pouring out the wrath of God on this city, this great city. I don't think that Revelations is real hard to understand. That sounds kind of crazy, even when I say it to myself, because I don't understand everything. But on one level, it's pretty simple and it's pretty straightforward. If you go back to Revelations, let's turn back a couple more chapters to Revelations chapter 11. This is the two witnesses. They're testifying in this great city. They're killed. They're in the streets. Verse 8 of Revelations 11. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom in Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Spiritually, this is as bad of a city as Sodom and Gomorrah. Spiritually, this is as bad as back when the plagues were dished out on Egypt. This city has committed fornication with the kings of the earth. Spiritually, this city is Babylon, where every dark bird resides. We read in Revelation 17 in one of our last lessons, and you might want to listen to a couple of those lessons for more clarification. But when we got to the part about the harlot, at the end of the harlot, said in Revelation 17, verse 18, and the woman or the harlot that thou sawest is that great city. So I think it's pretty clear that this great city, where all the reaping is being done, all the wrath of God that's being poured out, I think we could sum it up into the city Jerusalem without very much question at all. I think it encompasses a greater area than just Jerusalem, because if you read Matthew 11, Jesus says, woe unto you, Chorazin and Bethsaida, for if the works that I did inside of you, all the miracles, if I did all these miracles in Tyre and Zidon, they would have repented. If I would have done all these miracles that I did inside of your city walls in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented, and they would still be on the earth. And it is going to be worse for you in that day, Revelations, than for Tyre and Zidon, or for Sodom and Gomorrah. And boy, do we have a description of how God saw those that killed his son that he sent, and the servants that he sent, and all the innocent blood that was sent, all the way back to Abel. He was holding them accountable, that generation. And the beautiful thing is that we can look back and see historic evidence that these things took place. The temple was destroyed in the generation that Jesus was speaking to. The city Jerusalem was burned, destroyed. I mean, read the accounts. And they're still crying at the Wailing Wall today. And what is the Wailing Wall? I had somebody say, well, if the Wailing Wall is there, maybe the temple wasn't completely destroyed. Maybe that's evidence that it's still in our future. I've looked at that. It's a wall that was put in by Herod. It's an addition to separate off the temple area, but it wasn't part of the temple. It's a wall that the Romans used for protection in the winter. They also had the remnants of a tower that they left to protect their troops through the winter. This place was annihilated. Today's news report, it says, today missiles were seen flying over the ancient city Jerusalem. A lot of people are asking for the peace of Jerusalem today. I'll probably do a separate video on that. But I would challenge you. The city that Jesus walked through, the city that Peter was preaching in, the city where Paul went to the temple, that city historically was destroyed. Since it's been rebuilt, hundreds of years later, it has been rebuilt. But if you go visit Jerusalem today, you're not walking down the same streets that Jesus walked down. Not at all. You're not going to visit a building where he visited because it was wiped out. This is a different city now. This is a city. It is not We have a new Jerusalem now. And that's a city that's not made with hands. This stuff's pretty good. I mean, it's pretty compelling. Read through Revelations here about the vengeance upon this city. It frustrates me because this is in our past. And hindsight is supposed to be 2020. And I don't know how God isn't offended at us when we take this prophecy that's been fulfilled and put it in our future. I understand how we got here and how I was taught and why I believed what I believed. I understand a lot of that. I don't know how pleasing that is to God. It doesn't affect your salvation, but imagine if we were putting the redemption story in our future. That wouldn't be very pleasing to God either. That was finished. All things that are written, Jesus said, will be fulfilled in this generation. If we can identify who this woman is and who this city is and see that they're actually the same thing, it sure does make Revelation seem a lot more understandable. We don't have to do gymnastics. When you're putting this in the future, you have to look at the 7 churches that are named in Revelations 2 and say, well, maybe that's the first one church is a dispensation of the churches since then. And we're in one of these dispensations. I've heard that. The church here represents the Dark Ages, and the church here represents the early church, and the church here represents the age that we're in. Or they were 7 churches of that day that Jesus was specifically addressing because he was about to return. And he was straightening them out, and he was encouraging them. He's walking in their midst, and they were specific. Read the letters because they're pretty specific to each specific town. It's pretty incredible. The great city Babylon, who is it? If you can't see Jerusalem in this picture, I hope that you'll keep looking. If you can't see that Jesus, everything that he was saying to that generation was being fulfilled, what did that mean? The angel comes out of the temple. The temple was there, and then it was destroyed. The altar was there. It's beautiful when you can see it, and hindsight should be 2020. It helps you see some of the things when we put it in the right paradigm. I hope that it's helpful. I'd like to talk about some other things, but that's the great city. It's pretty compelling.